This is a guest essay written by Hannah Revite Schank, a writer and fourth-generation Brooklyn Jew.
Editor's note. Since the Hamas-led massacre in Israel on October 7th, 2023, Columbia University has become a flashpoint for anti-Semitism in American academia. Jewish students and faculty have faced harassment, intimidation, and outright threats as campus protests have veered from calls for Palestinian solidarity into open support for terrorism and violent rhetoric against Jews. In the weeks following the attack, Columbia students organized pro-Hamas demonstrations, with chants calling for the destruction of Israel and the glorification of its attackers. Reports surfaced of Jewish students being physically harassed, doxxed, and warned not to attend classes for their own safety. Columbia's administration, slow to respond, initially allowed these protests to continue unchecked, even as they created a climate of fear for Jewish students. More recently, Mahmoud Khalil, a Syrian-Palestinian and former graduate student at Columbia University in New York City, was a leading organizer for the Columbia protest movement, which included unlawful conduct, namely property damage and vandalism. He was recently arrested for aligning with U.S.-designated terrorist organizations, such as Hamas. Khalil's case has exposed the university's deeper entanglement with radical ideologies, as faculty and student organizations quickly rushed to his defense, portraying him as a victim of political persecution rather than investigating his connections to terrorism. Meanwhile, faculty members have endorsed anti-Israel statements, and entire departments have promoted narratives that justify Hamas's actions. Columbia's Middle East Studies programs, long criticized for their anti-Israel bias, have taken a leading role in pushing this agenda. Jewish students have described feeling unsafe in classrooms, where professors openly express hostility toward Israel, and by extension, Jewish identity. The university's failure to protect its Jewish community reflects a broader reality. Elite institutions that once imposed quotas to keep Jews out are now embracing a new iteration of exclusion, one that frames Zionism as colonialism and Jews as oppressors. In doing so, they have created an environment where anti-Semitism thrives under the guise of academic discourse and political activism. Let's start with a passage from the book, The War Against the Jews, by Lucy S. DeWitowitz. Quote, "He had discovered that Jews dominated the liberal press in Vienna and the city's cultural and artistic life, that they were behind the social democratic movement, Marxism. Triumphantly, he had at last found an answer to the original question he had posted about the Jew. The Jew was no German. Many answers have been given, and perhaps many are needed, for no single theory can satisfactorily explain Hitler's phenomenal success with the German people. They were mesmerized by his voice, and they responded to his message. Was it because their moral sense, at least with regard to the Jews, had become atrophied under the effect of generations of virulent anti-Semitism? Had the German people already become mithridatized by anti-Semitic poison, so that they had become immune even to Hitler's deadly brand? Was it because he spoke for them?" End quote. A cool thing about being an American Jew right now is you never know which person in your community is going. Demonstrate how anti-Semitism is a part of American culture. That the epicenter of modern Jew hatred over the past year is Columbia University. In New York City is no accident. Worse, Mahmoud Khalil's arrest is multi-layered and nuanced, never a good thing for the Jews, especially in a society that expects $20 jeans delivered to their door yesterday. I am a Columbia graduate, as is my husband, my brother, and my grandfather. Culturally, Jews value education, and Jewish refugees to America prioritized it above all else as a means to social mobility. And where do the most Jews live in the United States? New York City, with 1.4 million of us in the greater metropolitan area and a whopping 10% of the New York City population. Thus, the institutions overwhelmed with applications from Jewish students are always New York City, the City University of New York, Hunter College, and Columbia University. All four institutions have been shaped by both Jews and American anti-Semitism. My great-uncle's father was the first Jew to graduate from New York University Medical School in the late 1800s. At the same time, the crush of Eastern European Jewish refugees crowding the Lower East Side of Manhattan began applying to college. An essay in Commentary magazine from the 1970s explained, quote, "The spectacle of over 1 million Jews clustered in New York City aroused the predictable xenophobic reaction. America now had a Jewish problem, and American nativism, a new target. The essence of the Jewish problem was how to control the influx of Jews into areas of social activity that were predominantly Protestant." End quote. Previously, university was for Protestants, which meant you got in with a diploma from Andover, a gin and tonic, and a handshake. But now, impoverished Jews with perfect grades, class valedictorians like my grandfather, were banging at the gates, demanding entrance into an exclusive club. And when you admitted them, they weren't regular college boys. They didn't play sports in the quad after class. They raced to jobs or home to help their families. Thus, Columbia added athleticism and a swimming test to their admissions requirements. The Jews wore shabby clothes rather than J-Press. They didn't sit in the beer hall singing college drinking songs. When Columbia thought about what a Columbia man should be, Jewish, poor, and exceedingly studious were not characteristics that sprang to mind. From Commentary magazine again, one writer in 1910 observed that in colleges there were two classes, the one favored according to undergraduate thinking, holding its position by financial ability to have a good time with leisure for carrying off athletic and other showy prizes. The other class, in sheer desperation, taking the faculty, textbooks, and debating more seriously. Each class runs in the same rut all its life. Columbia quickly closed their doors by rejecting anyone with a Jewish name. Jews responded by changing their last names, which is why I am Shank and not Shankalowski. Thank you, anti-Semitism, for sparing me the task of spelling Shankalowski for dinner reservations. Not wanting to be bested by a bunch of swarthy, hairy, impoverished people, Columbia decided they now wanted a regional balance of students, allowing them to admit Protestants from across the country and avoid the Northeast, where American Jews clustered. Finally, Columbia created an entire second location in Brooklyn for the Jews. It was Columbia, sort of, not really, but good enough for a dirty Jew like Isaac Asimov. Then, in a final stroke of genius, Columbia's president invented the college interview. The man who developed this device, likely still used to limit Jewish enrollment, was President Nicholas Murray Butler. Yes, my fellow Columbians, Butler Library, where you spent many wonderful hours, is named after an anti-Semite who never recognized his own role in cementing anti-Semitism into American culture. After Columbia staunched the flow of Jews, Jewish enrollment at Columbia University in New York City and Hunter College hit 90%. And Jews began to swamp New York University, NYU, which earned the name of NY Jew. Why can't anti-Semites be more creative? In the Midwestern United States, the same thing was happening at the University of Michigan, or Jew-U, and in the South at Tulane University in New Orleans. My grandfather was an NY Jew undergrad in the 1920s, lived with his aunt in Brooklyn to save on rent, wore his ROTC uniform every day because he was a growing boy who had no other clothes, and lived off of 5-cent Hershey bars. He did not play lacrosse or drink in a beer hall. He did learn the Columbia fight song, which he turned into a super sexist ditty about the Women's Army Corps and women accepted for volunteer emergency service during World War II. We used to sing it at Passover along with a host of other World War II drinking songs. After the Holocaust, in the heady days of post-war unity, American universities claimed to open their doors wide open to Jews. Come on in, Jews. Don't join our fraternities and try to play at least a little lacrosse or wear a polo shirt and loafers, but whatever, man. We're all equal now. By 1967, 40% of Columbia students were Jewish, and support for Israel was high. People remembered the Holocaust and thought Jews deserved a little slice of their indigenous land on which to create their own Jewish state. Today, Jewish student enrollment has dropped sharply across the Ivy League universities to 20% at Columbia, which also houses a rabbinical school, and 9% elsewhere. While I was a student there, I was a Jew in a not very Jewish program. On my second or third day of school, I stayed after class to correct a professor's pronunciation of my name. Then, she asked me if I knew how to pronounce the name of another student in the class. The other Jew, as it happened. Was she asking me because I was a Jew? I was 30 by the time I got to graduate school, and aware of how lightly Jews must tread in America. I'd already been paired with another New York Jew as my undergrad roommate at a very Midwestern school, while encountering students who'd never met a Jew, but had some preconceived notions about New Yorkers that hewed closely to anti-Semitic tropes. At my job as a change management consultant, and later at dot-com startups, I'd begrudgingly participated in Secret Santa exchanges and quietly used vacation days to observe Jewish holidays. I dated a slew of non-Jewish men who thought I was marriage material, if only I'd get over the whole Jewish thing. The thesis I wrote at Columbia, which became my first book, was about the insanity of wedding planning. I left the fact that it was a Jewish wedding until the end, because I didn't want to be known as a Jewish writer. When the book came out, another Jew review bombed it as chick lit, which was just as bad. But what surprised me at Columbia was the prevalence of Marxism. I was coming from the private sector, where people's jobs required them to sit in front of Microsoft Disk operating system, and later Windows, for 8 hours, swap voicemails, run meetings, and attend PowerPoint training. They did this to pay their bills and feed their families, which is generally why people work. Yet, somehow, everyone at Columbia believed they were smarter, wiser, and more equitable than the people in the private sector. The private sector was bad. Academia was good. Therefore, anything that happened on campus was true and correct. Which is how we get to today. I didn't go to Columbia to learn about Marxism. I went to learn how to be a writer. I bushwhacked my way through the Marxist theory to become the writer I am today. My husband went to learn the intricacies of Russian literature, then ditched academia when he was asked to personally save the field of Russian literature, ideally with post-colonialism and Marxist theory. My brother went to get a decent college education and a leg up in American society. My grandfather to claw his way out of poverty and into an American life. Whatever your feelings about the events on the Columbia campus, I am certain no one has been getting an education there for some time. People are learning all the wrong things, protesting all the wrong things, directing their anger at all the wrong people, and Jews, again, will be the ones who suffer. Anti-Semitism is thoroughly baked into American culture. All Jewish women are either the nanny or Glee's Rachel Berry, both hilariously, Jewishly unattractive, pushy, and annoying. And all men are either the nerdy schlub Ross Geller, lusting after a shiksa goddess he can never have, or greedy hooked-nosed goblins of Gringotts Wizarding Bank. It doesn't take much to fan the flames of something that has been ever present in the culture. Like Germany pre-World War I, most Americans already understand anti-Semitic tropes, no matter how much they might protest. One of my Columbia professors, a man who I respected as a writer, revealed himself to be a clueless white man shortly after October 7th, when I shared that my cousin's memoir about surviving Auschwitz was only available for purchase from a white supremacist bookstore in Texas. He commented, "Why would a white supremacist bookstore want a book about Auschwitz?" Naturally, he has also been posting Hamas propaganda and recommending books that offer a one-sided take to the situation in Gaza. He was my first workshop professor, which is a big deal in a Master of Fine Arts program. You always remember your first workshop professor. The Auschwitz comment was devastating. Here was someone I knew and respected, despite his Marxist view, someone I considered well-read and high-educated, who could not figure out what white supremacists might have against Jews. But his view is to be expected. America is awash in anti-Semitic tropes. so deeply rooted we don't even notice them. And our universities are the epicenter of the fight. Predictably, well-meaning people have fallen for the world's oldest hatred, with massive rallies for a Palestinian terrorist, rather than massive rallies to free the American Jews held hostage by the same terrorists. You might wonder what a terrorist was doing at Columbia in the first place, unless you know that Columbia wants Jew hatred. They court it. They never stopped being anti-Semitic. Importing foreign terrorists as students is simply their latest attempt at keeping Jewish student enrollment low. So I ask of these people rallying behind the terrorist student Mahmoud Khalil, is it because their moral sense, at least with regard to the Jews, has become atrophied under the effect of generations of virulent anti-Semitism? Have American universities already become mithridatized by anti-Semitic poison, so they've become immune to this new pro-Hamas brand? Or is it because Mahmoud Khalil speaks for them?